I'm going to get another drink of water. I don't know why I put it away. So welcome to Gita from Zero. This is session 30. Today is June 21, June 21st. Okay, so these are some of the things that I hope to go over today. We'll see how well we get on with it. So we're going to do a little bit more with the flow of the dialogue and the flow of how this chapter 2 is metered out. And a little bit about creation, Buddhi Yoga, Karma Yoga, and we're going to talk about the no-loss philosophy, which is Krishna consciousness as explained by Srila Prabhupada. And then we'll wrap it up with a little bit about Pravrti Marg and Nivritti Marg, which are both very important concepts. And in this particular part of Bhagavad Gita, we'll be discussing them. Now, this is where we are on the larger scale. We are on June 21st here. Next week, we'll be talking about a whole bunch of things: sense gratification, karma kanda, the yoga ladder, our eternal relationship. And this will move us into the second part of the subsection 4. We're beginning subsection 4, which is sometimes called the Buddhi Yoga subsection, and it goes all the way from 39 to 53. But that's too many to do in one setting, so I broke it into 3 pieces like I did with the not the body section, which we did 2 weeks ago. So we're doing only 39 to 43 today, and then next week we'll do 44 to 48, and then we'll finish up the Buddhi Yoga section on the 5th of July, 49 to 53. And then we'll move into the last section of Bhagavad Gita, which is subsection 5, which is Arjuna's 4 questions. And we hear about Astita D. Muni, so that'll be into July. All right, so that's an overview of the whole thing. And again, today, session 30, we're doing subsection 4, the Buddhi Yoga section. That section goes all the way from 39 to 53, but we'll only be covering 39 to 43, which is part 6 today. And we'll talk a little about the flow of the dialogue and so also the flow of the chapter in general. And we'll talk about Buddhi Yoga, Karma Yoga, no-loss philosophy, Pravrti Marg, and Nivritti Marg. I wanted to begin with a recap of last week, which we kind of went through pretty quickly, but that was subsection 3 last week, which was the subsection that I called Krishna's social arguments. And so verse 31, Krishna tells Arjuna there's no better duty than fighting. Krishna has gone through a lot of philosophical reasons for why Arjuna should fight, and now Krishna is talking about his social reasons, that he has to keep up the reputation of his family, and also that he's a kshatriya or a warrior by occupation. So he has a duty to fight. So kshatriyas are happy to get their opportunity to fight. And in 33, Arjuna does not fight. Then he will get sin, which turns Arjuna's argument 180 degrees. Arjuna is saying that if he does fight, he will get sin. Krishna is saying, no, quite the contrary, that if he doesn't fight, he'll get sin. He's a kshatriya, he's supposed to fight. 34, Arjuna will be disrespected, and that'll be worse than death. And 35, great generals will think he's failed to fight, and only they'll assume it was because he was fearful, which of course he's not, but that's what they'll assume. And then 36, Arjuna's enemies will scorn his abilities, so even people who are his friends will think he bailed out of the fight due to fear, and then his enemies will be even less kind than that. And Krishna is explaining either you will die on the battlefield and you'll go to heaven, or you will win on the battlefield and you will secure a kingdom for yourself and your brothers. And so then he ends with, fight for the sake of fighting. Don't worry about happiness or distress, loss or gain, victory or defeat. So that was what happened last week. And that was an entire subsection in itself. I didn't have to break that one into any pieces. It was, 8 verses long, but it was pretty easy going because it was all kind of around one subject. So that was subsection 3. We finished that last week. So now, moving into this week, these are not subsections now, these are sections. These are actual full-on sections. So we've done through the first section, which was Arjuna's doubts and surrender. That was 1 to 9. We did that, about a month ago, and that's where we started chapter 2. Arjuna had some more objections to the battle. Krishna heard them, and then Krishna starts off by rejecting Arjuna's argument. Then 2 was what the big long section we just did, that's subsection 2, where Krishna replies by explaining the body, soul, and reality. That's not the body section. That was a long one. We had to break that into 3 pieces. It went from 10 to 30. And then after that was last week's section, which was Krishna's further arguments explaining the duty of a kshatriya, Krishna's social arguments. That's what we completed. Today, we're at 4, Buddhi Yoga. And we're not going to go from 39 to 53, but only from 39 to 43. So we'll only be doing about half of it, or so, third of it, something like that. And that's the section we're in this time, the Buddhi Yoga. And I'll explain a little bit what Buddhi Yoga actually means, what the term means, because it's not a common use term, either in Bhagavad Gita, or as far as I'm aware, in any usage. We don't usually hear about Buddhi Yoga. So then later on, after we finish that section, which will take 3 weeks, this one being one of those 3 weeks, we'll get into the last section, which is Krishna speaks on transcendentalists answering Arjuna's 4 questions, which takes it from 54 to 72, and that's the last section. All right, so that's kind of an overview of where we are, where we've been. And now we're looking at it not from philosophical breakdown, but just the flow of the dialogue. Krishna chides Arjuna after Arjuna gives his various objections. Arjuna explains his further doubts. Then Arjuna surrenders but remains adamant about not fighting. Then Krishna explains the body, soul, spirit, matter, and reincarnation. We've been all through that. Then Krishna explains the duties of the kshatriya. That was last week. Now, Krishna will explain Buddhi Yoga, and then in about 3 more weeks, Arjuna will ask 4 questions, and Krishna will reply to those. So that's the flow of the dialogue. So here are actual verses. This is from the subsection 4, which goes from 39 to 53, but we're only going from 39 to 43 here. So, thus far, I have described this knowledge to you through analytical study. Now listen as I explain it in terms of working without fruitive results. O son of Pritha, when you act in such knowledge, you can free yourself from the bondage of work. So, Krishna is explaining that he talked about analytical study, which is what we described, the term is being used for that is Sāṅkhya Yoga. And this week Prabhupada will explain a little bit about Sāṅkhya Yoga. Sāṅkhya is the process of explaining something in detail or measuring something in very minute ways. So that's the concept behind Sāṅkhya. But now he's talking about working without fruitive result, and this is being called Buddhi Yoga. But actually, Buddhi Yoga is not any different from what we've been calling Karma Yoga, and it's not any different from what we call Bhakti Yoga. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But we're switching. Arjuna has heard Krishna's analytical arguments, which was actually 10 through 30, and then he heard that small bit about how he should do it because of his occupation, 31 through 38. And now we're talking about how to act without fruitive results. So Arjuna is thinking, well, if I don't fight, then I can't possibly incur sin, because by not doing anything, that's not a sinful act. but Krishna is explaining that actually acting is the right thing, but acting in the right way. And so how do you act in the world at the same time, not get bondage to material work? So this is an important point. And this is the beginning of this point. Krishna is beginning to make it here. And Arjuna will not grasp this point. And he'll ask, at the beginning of chapter 3, he'll ask a question which shows he doesn't understand this. And then, interestingly enough, also at the beginning of chapter 5, Arjuna will ask almost the same question that also indicates that he hasn't really quite grasped this point. And so, if you have trouble grasping parts of Krishna consciousness, you're in the same league with Arjuna. Arjuna also didn't get it right away. So, what's kind of at play here is that Krishna is saying, no, there's nothing wrong with acting, but what's wrong is to claim the results of your action. That's what's wrong. So we'll get into that much, much later. We won't get into it. It's beyond the scope for today. But we are right now just explaining that this is a new subsection. Krishna is indicating it by the way he's framing what he's saying here. I've talked to you about knowledge, which was the Sāṅkhya, or the, not this body section. And now I'm going to explain to you how you should work, but without fruitive results. Any question about that? Okay. So now, this is verse 40, which is a very important verse. In this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. So what do you suppose is the most dangerous type of fear?
Dangerous type of fear?
Yeah.
You say the number one fear is public speaking, and second is death.
Right. I heard that too.
Yes, but maybe death. Yeah. Perhaps.
Well, I think Arjuna's not too worried about public speaking, but the issue here is that the most dangerous type of fear, according to the Vedas, is neither public speaking or being audited for your taxes or any of those kind of things. But the most dangerous type of fear is to fall into the animal species because you have misused your human life. So, and to fall in the animal species, you have to really misuse your human life. But then the material world kind of sets you up for that. If you don't know what you're doing, you'll almost certainly misuse your human form of life. So this is an important thing. We'll get into that a little bit more in detail. So when we unpack it, according to what Prabhupada and what Burijan say about it. Okay, so in this endeavor there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. 41. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. O beloved child of the Kurus, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is many-branched. So here we hear a Sanskrit term, Vyavasāyātmikā Buddhir. Vyavasāyātmikā Buddhir. That term means to be laser-focused in one important sense, on one important thing. And those who don't have a focus on one thing, then their intelligence is many-branched. So if you're many-branched, you're not on a path. Well, you are in one sense. You're on the path to general destruction and discombobulation. That's what you're on the path for. But if you are actually on the spiritual path, then your aim is one. And what is that aim? We'll talk about that a little bit later. So here, the last two verses here, 42 and 43, they're actually combined into one verse. Men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation of the heavenly planets, result in good birth, power, and so forth. Being desirous of sense gratification, opulent life, they say that there is nothing more than this. So these verses seem unassuming, but actually there's a big volume of meaning in these last 3 or 4 verses, about the Vedas and the Flowery Words. We'll be talking about that. And about no loss or diminution in the endeavor, and about one-pointed and many-branched intelligence. These are very essential concepts, and I'm going to describe them here in a moment. Any questions yet? Okay. So here are Prabhupad's points. If you read the purports, these are the things that come up in Prabhupada's purports on these particular verses. The word Sāṅkhya is explained, and I think Sāṅkhya is actually, you could make a case for it being the precursor to the word science. It's talking about explaining something in very much detail. It's talking about measuring and encompassing. So these are some of the synonyms in English, or actual translations for the word Sāṅkhya in English. And of course, Sāṅkhya is a philosophy. We talked about that a couple of 3 weeks ago, that there's an entire branch of philosophy within the current of Vedic philosophy. So within the whole purview of Vedic philosophy, one branch of it is called Sāṅkhya. And that branch talks about the 5 senses, the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses, the 5 working senses, the 5 material elements, and the 5 subtle sense objects. And then it talks about mind, intelligence, false ego, and time, the soul, a few other things like that. How these 24, 25, 26 things interact to create the reality of where we are and what we should do about it. So, the original Sāṅkhya is described, we'll be reading it soon upstairs in our Bhagavatam class, which is in 3rd Canto. We're at 3rd Canto, chapter 23 right now, but in a little while, Devahuti's son will begin to explain to her the process known as Sāṅkhya. But his Sāṅkhya is radically different from the way Sāṅkhya is described in India today, because there are 2 Kapilas. One Kapila was the son of Devahuti, and he was actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he explained a theistic version of Sāṅkhya. But much, much later, there was another Kapila who was actually an atheist, and it's that Kapila who most scholars and people who study the Vedas or study Indian philosophy, it's that Kapila that they know, and it's that Kapila they reference. And his philosophy was thoroughly atheistic. So this is something Prabhupada explains in his purports. And this more recent Kapila, I don't know how long ago his term of preaching existed, but he's much more recent than the original Kapila. But at any rate, he has done his part to skew understanding of Vedic knowledge in a very unfortunate direction. And that's why not only Sāṅkhya, but many of the branches of Indian understanding are decidedly either atheistic or impersonalistic in their core. So tends to be that when we hear about Nyaya or logic, it tends towards an impersonalistic or a atheistic interpretation. Sāṅkhya tends toward an impersonalistic or atheistic interpretation. The Vaisheshika philosophy tends toward an impersonalistic or atheistic interpretation. So all these things, even yoga for the most part, not so much atheistic, but mostly impersonalistic. And certainly the philosophy of karma, well, karma mimamsa philosophy, that is definitely decidedly atheistic. It's only when you come to Vedanta Darshan, the sixth of those things, that all the others are explained, but all of them are explained within a theistic perspective. So then we put the thing back together. So, at any rate. So Prabhupada talks a little bit about Buddhi Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. These are just basically, in the way that they're being used here in Bhagavad Gita, essentially the same thing. Buddhi means intelligence. So why this term, Buddhi Yoga? Because Arjuna has said that if I was intelligent, I wouldn't fight. So Krishna is saying, no, this is what an intelligent person actually would do. An intelligent person would fight. So this is kind of the yoga of intelligence. How you can act but not act, and that acting but not acting is not a product of what your body is doing, but it's a product of your internal mental outlook, which is what an intelligent person does. An intelligent person doesn't refrain from acting. An intelligent person refrains from acting in a wrong way, but he does not refrain from acting in the right way. So, Buddhi Yoga, that's where the term fits there. Now, Karma Yoga, again, Arjuna has suggested not to work. So, Krishna, to counter that, we're hearing karma, he should work. So, he's indicating to Arjuna that Arjuna should not refrain from working, but he should work. And that intelligent people are not refraining from work because of their intelligence, but they are actually actively working because they know what the highest thing is. So that's how these two terms are there. But essentially, for 98% of the time, we call it Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga means yoga of devotion. How we learn or how we practice what we are doing, we're practicing bhakti, the yoga of devotion. What is bhakti? Bhakti is the idea of trying to please the Supreme Lord by understanding what the various 9 stages or 9 types of bhakti process are, and by doing those you are purified. So there are 9 processes of bhakti: Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, Marchanam, Bandhanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmini Videnam. So hearing, chanting, remembering, worshiping, etc. I won't go over those in detail. We will at a later time, but not right today. So that is what bhakti is all about. And essentially, in the setting here in second chapter, Buddhi Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, these are all synonyms. But that is not true in general, as we discussed a little bit last week, that in some contexts, Karma Yoga does not mean the same thing as Bhakti Yoga, but in the current context it does. Any questions? So the important item here that we are focusing on today is this idea that was described in chapter 2, verse 40. And that item that was described is that one never loses the effects of bhakti. So the 40th verse of the second chapter says that the effects of bhakti are not lost when we die. So even a little advancement on the path of devotional service, even a little advancement saves one from the most dangerous kind of fear. That means that we may begin the path of bhakti, and we may be far from perfecting the path of bhakti, where we're giving everything to the Supreme Lord. We take no concept for ourselves. We are fully surrendered. We may be a long way from that. But at least we have tried to put our feet on that path, and we are working our way there as imperfectly or as incompletely as we may actually still be. But if we die in such a situation, we have nothing to fear. And the reason is simple. The reason is that the effects of devotional service outshine or supersede this lifetime. Whatever we achieve in this lifetime, in the process of bhakti, we will begin with the next lifetime at where we left off, which is not true for everything else. If you were very wealthy in this lifetime, when you die, you don't get to take it with you, as they say. And if you were very well known, you don't get to take that with you. If you had a lot of power and influence in the world, when you're born again, you don't get to take that with you. If you were a very, an intellectual, a very big stature, great stature, you don't get to take that with you. So everything that people work for in the material life, it ends with the body. When we die, we lose it all. Our name, fame, reputation, our relationships, our past, our family, our money, our achievements, all those things, they all disappear when we are stripped of our body, because at death we are destined for a new body. However, this does not happen with the effort that we have made towards spiritual life, towards devotional service. If we've made 15% progress, then our next life we start from a platform of 16%. We don't get knocked back down to zero. So you can play the karmic game, you can stock up good karma and do all kinds of pious things, but that piety may take you over into another lifetime, but you will eventually use up the good points of that pious activity, and you will lose them therefore. So in the long run, they will be of no value to you. So most people who aren't performing even pious activity, they won't have anything that they're carrying over from the previous life. If you're performing at least pious action, you were a considerate person, you followed the laws of spiritual life to some extent or another. You maybe didn't know about God. Certainly you weren't involved in serving God. You will get some benefit from that, but in the long run it's also of no particular value because it'll be lost. But the effects of doing devotional service carry over. So the effects of bhakti are never lost at any time. And that's what this verse that we just read was trying to tell us, that in this endeavor there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous kind of fear. Neha bikrama nasosti pratyavayo navidyate swapamapiyasya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. So that's what important thing is in verse 40. And this is something that maybe people haven't thought about. This is another one of those aspects of Vedic knowledge which, unless you've thought about it, you would never come to this realization that whatever we are managing to accomplish in this world will be stripped away from us, but not our advancement in spiritual life. Okay, so now we're going to the next verse, verse 41, Vyavasāyātmikā Buddhir ekeha kuranandana. So this is verse 41, which is verse right after the one we just talked about, and we hear about this thing called Vyavasāyātmikā Buddhir, or Onepointed Intelligence. And what does this mean? This means that every one of us has something that we consider important in life, or maybe more than one thing that we consider important in life. And therefore, when we're judging everyday activities, when we're acting in the world, these things affect our tree of priority, what we do first and what we do later on. And a person who's serious about spiritual life will be serious about thinking that the most important thing I could do with my life is to become focused in loving devotion to Krishna, to God. That's the most important thing. Now, I may also accomplish other things, but they're not as important. And if I'm fixed on that, then I may have some rough water along the way. I may get buffeted around by the material world, but I'm headed in the right direction. However, if we aren't focused on that, then we will dodge back and forth between various different kinds of goals, most of them materialistic. And material goals never take us anywhere except for in a circle. And that circle is further prolonged by the cycle of birth and death. So we may become more powerful, we may become more intelligent, we may become well-known, we may become whatever it is. We may become wealthy, but all these things are, in the long run, of no value. And a person who is going here and there can't focus on any one thing. And most people don't even focus on one thing. They just have this nebulous concept of I want to enjoy as their center pivot in their life. So if you just think in terms of I want to enjoy, then you're just going day by day. Now, this feels like it would be more enjoyment than that, so I'll do this. Tomorrow something else feels like it would be more enjoyment than what I did yesterday, so I'll do that. And in that way, our life isn't going anyway. It's a random walk. We're not progressing toward anything. So to make progress, one has to make a commitment to spiritual life. And if you make a commitment to spiritual life, Krishna says, I will take care of you. I will take charge of you. Even if you mess up, even if you try to leave the path, you will eventually get brought back around. So this is the importance of one-pointed intelligence. Any question about that? Okay. So if we're focusing, then Krishna is also suggesting what we should not focus on and why. So that's what happens in the next verses. Going back again. So, men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to heavenly planets, result in good birth, power, and so forth. Being desirous of sense gratification, opulent life. They say there is nothing more than this. So Krishna is speaking from the platform of the Vedas. And in the everyday world, most people are not really concerned with Vedic formulas for becoming pious, for getting entrance into heaven. Most people are not concerned with that. They're concerned with this life and enjoying. And most people, at least in the modern world, are convinced that we can enjoy more if we are just very intelligent about how we manipulate and tweak the external material world. If we have the controls set right, then we can enjoy. And so we don't think about karma. We certainly don't think about long-term reactions or interactions. And we don't think about a future life. Many people don't even feel there is a future life. So that's the way they think. But among those who have encountered the Vedic system, and this system is also to some extent replicated and mirrored in other religious scriptures, that if one is careful about the way we act, we don't abuse other people, we don't commit various kinds of sin, we are grateful for what we receive from the Supreme. If you do that, then you're playing the game of good future karma. And there is a section of the Vedas which is all about these flowery words of the Vedas. What's worse is that probably about something upward of 93-95% of all the Vedic literatures is about this flowery business of either trying to enjoy in this world or being promoted to heaven. So there are people who do specific activities. Jyotishtoma is one sacrifice that Prabhupada mentions, and people want to drink the soma or rasa, etc., etc. And these are all a focus on actual Vedic formulas to gain admission to the higher heavenly planets, which is pretty much the same thing as the other Western religions call heaven. So in heaven, you are given the results, the good results of a life of at least piety and refraining from gross sinful action. You're given those results, and you have beautiful body, you live for a long period of time. The kind of happiness you get there is way above the kind of things that people enjoy in this world, on the earth plane. However, what they don't tell you, and what isn't there in modern religious outlook, is the idea that the heavenly worlds are temporary. They're not as temporary as this world, as the earth plane, but nonetheless they are temporary, because you have to come back down from the heavenly worlds at some point. And that's when your bank account of good activities or pious activities runs out. So that's why we don't encourage any of this kind of stuff. And the remaining 5% of the Vedas, they don't talk about this at all. Rather, they talk about surrendering to the Supreme Lord. There is a world beyond heaven. That world is the spiritual world. And that world beyond heaven is an eternal world. It's the only eternal world. And beyond heaven is where people are not receiving the merits of their previous good actions, but what's actually happening is that they are getting the chance to serve the Supreme Lord directly and intimately. And that's a very different thing. And to be there, you have to be actually of that mindset that you want to serve the Supreme Lord. It's not about you there, it's about the Supreme Lord. But at any rate, that's kind of a basic thing. So many of the Vedic teachings or Vedic literatures, rather they talk about how to go to the heavenly worlds, how to perform pious activities, so in this world you will enjoy. And these are all things that are there in the Vedas, but an intelligent person pays no particular attention to those. And they are a big portion of the Vedas, so there's no surprise when we learn that most people who study the Vedas come away with the wrong concept. It's quite not only likely, but almost certain, unless they have a spiritual guide who takes them through it and helps them understand how these things refer. We'll talk about later on, not today, but the yoga ladder, which shows how there are different understandings that are there either formally by, in the Vedic system, taking various processes or various margas or paths very seriously, or they're there unofficially in the rest of the world by having certain mentalities. So one is higher than the other is higher than the other is higher than the other, and we'll talk about the yoga ladder next week. We won't do it here. But that's what's going on here, that we have a diversion into fruitive activity. And if you're after fruitive activity, you can get it through Vedic means, but it won't in the long run satisfy you. Any question? Yeah.
So you mentioned like 95% of Vedic literature tell us about heavenly planets, right? So in this means, so in this life, the 95% of literature just talking about making your karma better, right? So
right.
you just grow in your karma, so you will continue to live a good life, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
And that's unfortunate. And that's why most people are totally misled about what the Vedas are up to. And it's not a recent thing. In Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a whole story of Vyasadeva, who is the author of Vedic literature. We do not accept the modern concept that the Vedas are written by a number of different writers, and very recently, a millennium or so, or a millennium and a half ago. That's the modern Indological concept, but that's not what the Vedas themselves say. And the Vedas themselves are written, at least according to the Vedas claim they were written by a single individual. That individual is who? Vedavyas. So here is Vedavyas, and he has gone through the trouble of writing most of the Vedas. And his spiritual master, who is Narada Muni, arrives, and Narada Muni talks to Vedavyas. And he says, "My dear Vedavyas, you appear to be despondent, but you have written all the Vedas. You should be glorious. You should be in a good mood. Can I ask you why you feel something is wrong? You are fully equipped with all knowledge, And how does Vedavyas respond? He responds by saying, "I think that I did not give specific emphasis to the process of Bhakti Yoga." And Vedavyas himself says that you did not give any... not Vedavyas, but his teacher, Narada Muni, says, you did not specifically describe the glories of the Supreme Lord Krishna. So both of those things are missing. So the rest of the Vedas, they do talk about Bhakti Yoga, but it's only kind of in a potpourri. Bhakti Yoga is mentioned just like Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, or Stanga Yoga, or this yoga or that yoga. Bhakti Yoga is just thrown in there as one of the possibilities. However, what the real purpose is devotional service. So Vedavyas resolves to fix that. And his spiritual guide, who is Narada Muni, says, actually what you have taught people is not good at all. You've taught them about fruitive activities, which in the long run will frustrate them. So what you have done is actually, he uses the Sanskrit word jugupsitam. It is abominable. So he gets a real serious chastisement from his spiritual guide, who is Narada Muni. So Vedavyas decides to put things right by writing Srimad Bhagavatam, which does not cut any slack with these lower things. They are mentioned, but never as goals, just as things you should rise above. So from the time that that interaction happened, which is mentioned in first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, that Narada Muni and his disciple Vyasadeva discuss, and Narada Muni says, "My dear Vyasadeva, you have not really gotten to the real point." And Vyasadeva agrees. And then Vyasadeva writes Srimad Bhagavatam, which is unfortunate if you come to the Vedas and you don't read Srimad Bhagavatam. You kind of miss the point of the Vedas. And if you come to the Vedic literature and you don't understand Bhakti, or you think it's just as good or pretty much just an option like all these others are, you've also missed the point. So, and one can kind of argue with that concept. But then we're going to see that Krishna himself here is saying, "My dear Arjuna, don't worry about these flowery words." So Krishna himself is denigrating that aspect of the Vedas. And later on, Krishna will show which aspect of the Vedas he actually wants Arjuna to follow. That'll happen in chapter 6. So we're going to hear about which type of path Arjuna should be following in chapter 6. And Prabhupada says Buddhi Yoga, we're going to hear about that again in chapter 10. So that's later on down the road. So these flowery words are flowery because they attract the consciousness of the everyday living being to material gratification, but in a pious way. We're not going to just go out there and hack and hew and get what we want out of the material world by, any means possible. But we're going to do it in a karmic way, a pious way, by serving the Supreme to some extent, maybe propitiating various demigods, performing various pious homas and fire sacrifices. And by doing these various vratas like fasting, etc., we will accrue good karma for the future. But ultimately, this is all of no use. What we really need to do is just serve the Supreme. So Krishna is saying, forget about the flowery words. But what's ironic in this section, maybe I didn't pick it up until I just read it from Buddhi today, was that Krishna is using the opposite of the very argument he just finished giving Arjuna. In that other section where he told Arjuna, people will not respect you because you're a warrior, etc., etc. So there, Krishna's telling Arjuna to fight because of social reasons and of karmic reasons, not devotional reasons, but karmic reasons. And here, Krishna is rejecting that whole thing. So just after having spoken a few verses ago that Arjuna should take very seriously the karmic effect, and he'll lose all his good karma by not fighting. Now he's saying, don't worry about that. So Krishna's moving up a notch here again. So for that section from 31 through 38, that section is a kind of section where Krishna's just using that as extra added impetus for Arjuna to fight, but he's not serious about it from a philosophical perspective. But here he is serious. He's saying the flowery words of the Vedas are of no value to you. So don't worry about them. And this is, as we say, this was how Krishna said it. Men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation of heavenly planets, result in good birth, power, and so forth. Being desirous of sense gratification, opulent life, they say there's nothing more than this. So many people who either by their practice or even by their teaching, they claim to be preceptors in these various fields. They say this is what you should do and there's nothing more. Krishna is saying no. So that's what we get here. Any other questions about that? So now we'll go to what Buddhi says about this, which is interesting. He says that Krishna has said, I describe this process by analytical study, and now I'm going to describe by working without attachment. So analytical study, we could say, is the jnana or Sāṅkhya. Both of those are about the same. Buddhi explains that jnana and Sāṅkhya, in that case, are pretty much synonyms. And karma is working, but in the right way. They reject action and engage in meditation. So Arjuna thinks that Krishna is telling me about karma and jnana, but what I know about karma and jnana is that one should reject all action and engage in a process which winds up in meditation, and by ceasing all activities, I'll be perfected by meditation. So this is where Arjuna is becoming confused, because this is what Arjuna has in the back of his mind, but this is not what Krishna is saying. Krishna is saying something different. So Krishna, though, is indicating something different to Arjuna. So what is Krishna indicating? That he should continue to act, but acting in the right way through nishkama karma, acting but not accepting the results of his action. So that we talked about a little bit last week, and I'm not going to get into it this week. So we talked about Buddhi Yoga saving us from the most dangerous type of fear. What is that fear? We already talked about that. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gave a purport to this verse about Vyavasāyātmikā Buddhir, which is 241, and Prabhupada was inspired by that. And what does it actually say? That the process of bhakti yoga, if one is focused on it, then all other duties or all other necessities of the Vedas are automatically arrived at. We don't have to worry about it. And so Prabhupada then, convinced by that argument of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, focused exclusively on what he'd heard his spiritual master say: preach Krishna consciousness in the West. So top of, number 2 Altadunga Junction Road, on the top of the roof there, Bhaktisiddhanta had said to him when they first met, "You look like an intelligent devotee. You should preach this Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition in the Western English-speaking worlds." And so Prabhupada took that as his one-pointed motto, or his core of his existence. And of course, by doing that, one pleases the spiritual master. So, Baladeva Vijabhushana defines Vyavasāyātmikā Buddhir as accepting transcendental loving service to the Lord as the prime duty, freed from fruitive action. So we see how this one-pointed attention dovetails or connects with the next verse, which talks about the flowery words of the Vedas. So if we're sincere about pleasing the Supreme Lord, we are not also trying to ride the same boat of trying to rack up, good karmic positive points for the future. So, all right, so we already talked about Arjuna is being asked to give up the very same mentality that he asked Arjuna to accept in the social argument verses. So that's there too. Any questions about that? All right, so we'll wrap up here. This is our no-loss philosophy. Tyaktva sadharmam charanam bhujam harer bhajan apakvo tapatetato yadi yatrak vabhadram abudamusyakim ko varta apto bhajatam svadharmataha. This is actually from Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.17. One who has forsaken his material occupations to engage in devotional service of the Lord may sometimes fall down while in the immature stage. Yet there is no danger of his being unsuccessful. On the other hand, the non-devotee, though fully engaged in occupational duties, does not gain anything. So we have Jati Dharma and we have Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma is our eternal duty, our eternal obligation, and Jati Dharma is our occupational, our personal, our social duty, our social expectation. So one can try for devotional service, and if he fails in sometimes meeting his occupational or social commitments, if he fails sometime in meeting his devotional commitment, but he's working that point, he won't have any problem. There's no danger of his being unsuccessful in the long run. However, if someone perfectly, which is almost impossible to do, perfectly manage to make all your requirements that are required of you as a human being, family requirements, social requirements, requirements from the sages, requirements from intelligent people, requirements the government has on you, requirements from friends and relatives, all these. If you perfectly somehow manage to perform all those, but you don't actually make any progress in your devotional requirement, you haven't gained anything, because you will just die and be born again. It'll go on. So this is an important verse. This is quoted, by the way, in the purports, Tyaktva svadharmam charanam bhujam harer bhajana pokpo tapatet todyadi yatrak vabhadram ambudamusyakim ko varta apto bhajatam svadharmata. And so, can you get the microphone there?
So, when you're saying Jato Dharma and Swadharma, this is the same?
What's that?
Jato Dharma and Swadharma. Like in Bhagavad Gita, the term is used, Swadharma, is the same thing?
No, Jati Dharma is social or occupational duties. Both of them are duties. So, Swadharma is one's duty according to who he really is, which is spirit, soul, servant of the Supreme Lord. So our duty is to understand who we are and act in the capacity of serving the Supreme Lord. Even improperly, even incompletely, even intermittently. If we do that, we're resolving or managing to perform our important duty. However, aside from that, we have duties because we are born in a certain family. We have duties because we have a certain occupation. We have duties because we come from a certain country. We have duties because we have all these other things. These are all other duties that we have. Those are called Jati Dharma. And Prabhupada said earlier in a purport that sometimes Jati Dharma and Swadharma parallel one another, but sometimes they go in opposite directions. So that's why if one is intelligent, one will cleave to Swadharma at all costs. And Jati Dharma, if one can, we can't just renege or jump out of all of our everyday, requirements by government, friend, wife, relatives, whoever it happens to be. We can't just do that. But they're all secondary. And the two are not always compatible. And we find, though, that if we follow the Sanatana Dharma, that everything will work out in the long run. That we will certainly not incur any sin. However, if we manage to, and most people find this an incredible struggle, this is what most people are struggling with, to meet all their requirements and duties that the outside world places upon them for who they are, where they were born, et cetera, et cetera. So these are difficult to resolve requirements, So this is the important thing to manage to take away. So I want to finish up here because we're coming up on the end of our time here. I wanted to put this point out here because we are going to see in Bhagavad Gita the interplay between these two concepts. Now, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna does not use this terminology. He is using the same concept, but he's not using this terminology. This comes from the Srimad Bhagavatam. We have what's called Pravriti Marg and Nivriti Marg. It's what we just mentioned a few minutes ago. Pravriti Marg is the path of meeting your requirements in the world by the path of pious activity. We worship demigods, or we perform sacrifices, or we do various vratas and austerities. We follow Vedic regulations. We follow all the good duties that an upright thinking person, moral person would do. And this is the path of Pravriti Marg. But the end goal of Pravriti Marg is ultimately sense enjoyment. We want to enjoy either today or tomorrow in our present life, or we want to be promoted to the heavenly planets where we can enjoy big time. So that's Pravriti Marg. And as we were just saying, unfortunately, about 95% of the Vedas is all about Pravriti Marg, this path of sense enjoyment. For that matter, most of what passes as religion anywhere in the world is also about this, about how we act in a nice way, we see certain restrictions, we deal with things properly, we resolve our obligations, and therefore we can enjoy in the heavenly worlds. That's 90%. But the actual real deal is Nivriti Marg, or the path of renunciation. And what that means is we recognize, however imperfectly, that we are really a servant of God, and we are trying to learn how to serve God by changing our orientation, and that we are not serving God in order that God will serve us. We are just serving God, full stop. We're serving God because it's what the universe is for. And we are happy with that. We are not waiting for God to then give us our Christmas list. We are just serving God for that sake. And this begins to open the door so that we can go back to the spiritual world. We'll pass by heaven to the higher realm of where Krishna is actually performing his own pastimes. But there, everybody is focused on the Supreme and not on themselves. So 5% of the Vedic literatures talk about this Nivritti Marg, this path of learning how to serve the Supreme. And 95% talk about this Pravrti Marg, or how one can enjoy in the material world. Bhaktivinoda Thakur has said that if all the Vedas perished except for the Srimad Bhagavatam, and Bhagavad Gita, nothing would be lost. Because most of it is all about that. So people who come in the door of Vedic literature without a guru, without a guide, or people who just start studying at random will undoubtedly come across the Pravrti Marg and think this is what the whole deal is about, which it's not. And its own author repudiates that, assumption. And what it is about is this process of gradually coming to the understanding that we are servants of God and we want to please Him. And when we try to do that, we will do that imperfectly, we will do it intermittently, and we will still have material desires. But at least we understand what we should be doing and how to do it, and that's going to make the difference in the long run. All right, so any final questions before we go on to the...
Who's in the pictures?
What's that?
Who is in the picture?
Oh, okay, this is good. I use this picture. This is Sukracharya and Bali Maharaj, yeah, some reason. Couldn't pull that one out of my memory. Bali Maharaj. So Bali Maharaj was approached by Vamanadev, who's there in the seat under the parasol. Vamanadev was the Supreme Lord in the incarnation as a short dwarf-like being. So the Supreme Lord came in an incarnation where he was considered a dwarf. And this is key to the story too, because Vamanadev he came before Bali Maharaj, who was king of the whole universe at that time. Bali Maharaj was the king of all the demons. However, he himself was not a demon. And the demons were happy because at the leadership of Bali Maharaj, they had conquered the heavenly worlds and pushed the demigods out. So they were now in charge of the whole universe, all of them, with Bali Maharaj as the top. And this little boy comes, Vamanadev, and says, I want 3 paces of land. And Bali Maharaj says, you're sure? I mean, I'm the king of the universe. I could give you a whole planet if you wanted it. He said, no, I'm fine. If I took more than I needed, then I would be I would incur karma, and I would become more and more lusty after more and more things. So Bali Maharaj says, all right, if that's what you want. But this is his spiritual master, Sukracharya. Sukracharya comes to Bali Maharaj and says, my dear Bali Maharaj, you don't know that this Vamanadev is actually the Supreme Lord. He intends to cheat you out of your entire kingdom. So I suggest you renege on your promise to give him everything. And Bali Maharaj thought, well, if he is the Supreme Lord, I should give him everything, which is not the way demons think. And it was not what his spiritual master, Sukracharya, recommended, because his spiritual master was into Pravrti Marg. So if you want Pravrti Marg, you certainly don't want to give up everything. What's the point in that? And Bali Maharaj knew that this was kind of sleight of hand. This was a trick, that the little boy was there on behalf of the demigods so they could get their kingdom back very easily without a fight, And he could understand all those things, but he could see that, well, if this is really the Supreme Lord, as my spiritual master says he was, then whatever it is, I should give him everything. So he decides to do that. He gives, Bali Maharaj gives Vamanadev his entire kingdom, or he's ready to give him that. So he says, okay, take your 3 paces of land, and Vamanadeva takes his first pace, and it covers the entire Earth planet. And then he takes his second step, and it covers the heavenly planets. And there's no place left for his third step. And Vamanadeva said, my dear Bali Maharaj, you promised me 3 steps, but I only got to take 2. So you haven't been able to keep your promise. And that Bali Maharaj said, well, if you want, you can put your third step on my head. So he's actually captured and bound up by Vamanadeva. But in the long run, because Vamanadeva sees that he's a great devotee, he says, in the next Manvantar, you will be the next Indra. You will be, in fact, the king of the entire material world from the heavenly perspective. Right now, you can enjoy, and I will become your personal doorkeeper. So this just shows how a person who does go the full step of going to Nivritti Marg doesn't lose in the long run. Of course, the demons were totally angered, and the little boy and his associates asked Sukracharya, so what mistake did your disciple Bali Maharaj actually make? And Sukracharya had to answer, actually, he didn't make any mistake. So, but of course, he was still materialistically motivated, so that's not the end of Sukracharya's, reign as the spiritual guide of the demons. He's the spiritual guide of the demons. And we find that Bali Maharaj is actually exalted because he gave everything to the Supreme Lord. There's more to the story, but that's why I use this particular image.
Thank you.
Because it kind of highlights the difference between the 2 viewpoints, the Prabhati Marg and the Nivritti Marg viewpoint. So, wrapping up here again, next week, coming attractions. 28th of June, we will talk about sense gratification, karma kanda, the yoga ladder, our eternal relationship. And we'll talk about the distinction between karma, vikarma, and akarma, and equanimity. These are all there, and we'll still be in the subsection 4, which is this Buddhi Yoga subsection, but we'll be doing verses 44 to 48. That'll be next week on Wednesday. Any final questions or whatever's? All right, so thank you all very much. All glories to Srimad Bhagavad Gita, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.